two little girls were looking out the window and watching some naughty boys throwing rocks at a kitten right up in the tree. And as the girls were watching those naughty boys, the older girl said, "Poor kitty, poor kitty, poor kitty." And the younger one said, "I'll sock him in the pants. I'll sock him in the pants." Well, I'm the younger one. So my life is quite different from the one who said poor kitty, because my life has been one of socking them in the pants. We all grow up differently, and each one has a role in the family. I think you parents here notice how one child takes one role and another child takes another role. Well, my role in the family, I was the third child. There were two very lively and kids with lots of ideas and things ahead of me, so I was the quiet child, and I was the studious child. Not really studious, but anyway, I loved to read. And so the rest of the children kept the activities going, but Betty usually found a book to read. So I found my life many times walking to the public library. How far was it? A mile and a half or something? And walking to the library and looking in the children's section and finding a book or two and bringing it home and reading. I love to read. And in my reading, I've found that it's really been with me all of my life. Sometimes I found that I had to encourage other people to read. And so one part of my life has been sort of encouraging people to have book groups. It's one thing when you read something, but it's wonderful to discuss what you read, because you find that when you read a book, other people have other ideas about the book, and that's the way you grow. So I've been in many book groups through my life. When our church, when a young mother, decided to have small groups doing different things beside the big group, they decided to have an exercise group, and some people wanted a cooking group, and some people even wanted a house cleaning group. That didn't last very long. But I said we needed a book group. We needed to have a book group, and so we started a book group. That was over 50 years ago, and the only group that ever lasted in that group, that gathering of people, was the book group. The book group is still going. Also, later, I was asked if I would be willing to lead a book group at a retirement center. So, and that was 40 years ago. And I still do that at the retirement center. And it seems like, well, you know, sort of an uninteresting thing to lead a book group at a retirement center, old people. But I found that it's very interesting. And they have lots of ideas, and they read. And several of them have said the thing that they look forward to most in the month is coming to the book group. And so affirming someone else and helping someone else to learn has been important for me. So if I encourage you to read, why you go ahead and read. But the other, one of the things, I should tell you, I grew up and went to school, and after college, I taught. And then years later, after a number of boyfriends, my brother finally said to me, "You're going to be an old maid." Because I had just turned down a friend of his. So anyway, my response to him was, well, I don't want to be an old maid, but there's one thing worse than being an old maid, and that's being married to the wrong person, the wrong guy. So my life led me, and finally I was with a mission group and been assigned to a church to work with for a year. This was a training program. And Tookie was in the training program, and I was in the training program. And all of the people in the training program were assigned to a partner and sent to a different church to work in that church for, this was like 9 months, I think. Only there was an extra person. It wasn't an even number, and I was the lone one, so I went alone to a church. And I happened to be assigned to a church in Chicago that a very nice man and his wife were the pastor. And they took me in and had me live in their home. It was Samuel Obetz and Hazel Obetz. And so I worked in the church, and they had children. Their son was in the Navy, the one son, and they told me about him. And he came home one time, and I had to pick him up at the airport because they couldn't do that. So I picked him up at the airport, and the son was Wendell Obetz. And so finally he came home and lived at home for a few months while he took some courses at the Navy Pier, University of Illinois, I guess. Anyway, as story goes, we fell in love, and I was very hesitant about marriage. I didn't. Finally, I discovered something. While I was there, I found out that his parents had both gone to Moody Bible Institute, and while they were there, the assistant dean of women was Dorothy Dietz, who happened to be my father's cousin. And Dorothy invited students over on Sunday afternoons to get to know each other and to have a fun time. So at Dorothy Dietz's house, Samuel and Hazel met, and they became friends and married. A few years later, my parents, in the middle of depression, expecting their third child, were invited, mother was invited to Dorothy Dietz's house to have the baby at their home. So Betty was born at Dorothy and Emma and Dorothy Dietz's home. And so you can imagine Betty's surprise to discover that the home where she was born was the home where Samuel and Hazel Obetz met. So I almost felt fated. But it was the greatest thing that ever happened, because Wendell and I have had a wonderful life together, and I've really not made a mistake. And we've had 3 wonderful children, so we've been very grateful. Tim, 6 years later, Julia, and 2 years later, Christopher. And so we've been very grateful, had lots of enjoyable times with our children, and now our family's increased to have 2 wonderful daughter-in-laws. They're wonderful. And then the topping on the cake is our grandchildren, Cece and Lukey, and we really, they're the greatest. You all have nice grandchildren, but you don't know mine. But as my children grew, I became interested in many things and did many things in the city. But when they were in high school, I wanted to do something, and somebody called, a friend judge called and said, "Betty, there's something I think you'd like to do that I think you'd enjoy, or maybe you should do." And that is the Guardian Ad Litem program. And the Guardian Ad Litem program is a program where you represent children in the court system. So you represent the child, the best interest of the child. You recommend the best interest of the child to the court. I thought it might be interesting, and I took the training program, and so I became a Guardian Ad Litem. It opened a new world to me, because I saw children and homes and families that I had never, in my walk of life, I had not experienced. Sometimes it was very hard to walk into somebody's home. Lots of times I was not welcome. I was always taught to be polite, not to say anything that made anybody mad or unhappy. I was taught to only go where people wanted me. I was very careful. And in this program, I couldn't be careful. I had to go where I wasn't wanted, and I had to do and say things that people didn't like to hear. And I had to write letters that I didn't like to write to the court. And but it was a very interesting thing, because I felt like I was defending children and defending the best interest of children. Children often do not have a voice. Children do not have power. Adults have power. Parents have power, but children do not. And many times adults say, and parents say, well, I'm representing the best interest of my child. But we're all self-centered. And our own interests come first, even though we'd like to think that our children's interests come first. And so families in divorce, how many children are really injured and hurt in a divorce situation. It's really, I've seen so much. And in fact, at times I've talked to to adults that I knew who were contemplating divorce and talked to them and tried to get them to realize what they were doing to their family and their children. I've been with children who have been physically abused, who've been thrown across the room, who've been sexually abused, who've been neglected. There's so many things. Children whose parents don't care if they get to school. I've had to pick up children and take them to school and get them to school. There's so many things. I know some of you know what it is to defend a child. And it's a wonderful thing to defend the child. But it's also a terrible thing to recommend that a child be removed from his home, her home. The mother, the only mother they knew. They don't know any different. They don't know that the other children are raised differently. This is all they know. And so there's no easy answers. So I have no idea what time it is. I forgot to look. So anyway, it has been a life's, it's really a very important part of my life that I did this Guardian program, representing children. And I think I told you that so somebody had a hit on my life. Well, there were many times that I was very leery. I tried to meet parents. Lots of times I went into their home, but if it was a particular, certain men especially, I tried to meet in a restaurant because I felt it was a safe place. In fact, I remember one man that I had met him in a restaurant, and I mean, I knew him well, but he said, well, I had gone, he wanted me to come to his home. And so I promised to come to his home. I set a date when I would be coming to his home. And that time, I just felt that it wasn't, I was just uneasy about it. And as the days before I was supposed to go to his home, I just wasn't sure I should go. And I always prayed and asked God to give me wisdom and to give me understanding. And I remember that the day before I was supposed to go to his home, I was still very uneasy, and I thought, I don't know that I can trust him. And so, fortunately, my daughter was leaving the next day to go to Africa for a while, and so I was mending clothes and fixing clothes, and so I had a really good excuse. And so the morning I was supposed to meet the man, I called him and said, you know, I'm sorry, I just cannot come today. Later on, I found out that they had a whole family gathering to meet me at that home. And instead of just that man, his sisters and a few other people and brothers were all going to be there. So I was going to be overwhelmed by them, supposedly, so that I couldn't testify in court. This was a court case where we were really going to try to accuse him of some things. But anyway, those are interesting times because all along I felt that God was leading and guiding. but God's hand was upon me, and I appreciated that. Several times, people who didn't want to see me, I would drive up just as they were arriving home. They couldn't pretend that they didn't know I was there because they met me in the driveway. So God had his hand. Sunday at church, the youth minister happened to speak these verses from Psalm 82, verses 3 and 4. Thought I'd close with this. Give justice to the weak and the orphan. Maintain the right of the lowly and the destitute. Rescue the weak and the needy. Deliver them from the hand of the wicked. God bless you.